Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019 session in our series on entrepreneurship and Asian high-tech industries. I'm very happy that this week we can feature a startup that is cross-border between Taiwan and the United States in the kind of IoT space for medical care or patient care applications. We're very honored to have Dr. Jason Wang, who is the director of the Center for Policy, Outcomes, and Prevention, and also associate professor of pediatrics at Stanford University. And he chairs the Mobile Health and Other New Technologies group at the Stanford Center for Population Health Sciences. He got his BS from MIT, his doctorate from the Harvard Medical School, and a Ph.D. in policy analysis from Rand. After he completed his pediatric residency training, he at University of California, San Francisco, he worked in Greater China for McKinsey and Company. And in 2000, he was recruited to serve as the project manager for the Taskforce on Reforming Taiwan's National Health Insurance System. Now, all of those are great. In addition, he's a past recipient of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, Director's New Innovator Award for creating mobile apps for health. But specific to our seminar series today, he is a co-founder and currently advisor to this medical IoT company named MedicusTek. And I won't say any more. I'd like to turn the microphone over to Dr. Wang. Jason, thanks so much for coming and being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So if I could just quickly take a poll, how many of you are engineering students? Okay, so there's quite a few. And how many of you are in healthcare, medical students or students from health policy? Okay, good, wonderful. And how many of you are professionals? Oh, okay, so we have a very nice mix here. And so actually my office is not too far from here. It took me about 5 minutes to walk over here today, and it's a real pleasure. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me, because I don't usually give this talk at Stanford because I usually give health policy talks. And it's great that we have a sort of an interdisciplinary group here. So I have financial disclosure, which is I serve as a co-founder and advisor for MedicusTek. So today, I'm going to walk you through some of the topics. The first one is increasing role of technology in healthcare, and then what it's like to straddle a startup between Taiwan and the United States across the Pacific. And also tell you a little bit about what we're working on at MedicusTek, and also the challenges that I see in healthcare IoT space. So this is probably the most famous drawing in all of medicine, and it's called the Doctorate. So, you know, in the 1800s, there isn't really much that we could do for a patient. Penicillin wasn't invented until the 1900s. And you could see this mom is just really exhausted over there, and dad is really worried over there. And the doctor is thinking about the patient, what to do with the patient, and this child is very sick. So we move from what's happening in the role of a physician as sort of a counselor, as sort of a almost like a priest type of role, to a highly medicalized situation in the ICU. And the ICU was started in the 1950s. By 1970s, a lot of the places have implemented it. And so what I want to point out about this picture is that you could hardly see the patient's face anymore. And there's all these tubes. And I bet if we go to your office or your room, there's a lot of wiring too, that a lot of plugs that you need to plug in. And a lot of the times, just to plug into the right place is difficult. And so it requires a lot of sort of good design, if you will. Otherwise, you're going to plug the oxygen tank into some explosive situation. And so, and now moving into today. So we're already here. Actually, a lot of the hospitals are now sort of wireless, and either with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or different sort of communication protocols, and they're trying to wire patients' monitoring devices, different devices, in the hospital, and sometimes even across the hospital into the nursing home facilities, assisted living, and even into the homes. And so what that means is that in the future, and there are some places that's already doing it today, is that the information is going to get transferred across hospital walls under certain protocol. And certain encryption is going to be necessary, and there's HIPAA laws that guard against sort of the misuse of this type of data. But it's going to happen. And what it also means is that if you're not careful, somebody could have a virus in there and could steal all your data. And that's what happened to Target. Went through their ventilation system, went into their financial system. And so, all these things could happen, and it's going to be super convenient. But as we move into sort of the next generation of caring for the patient, patients are going to move from the hospital, including emergency room, ICU, into the outpatient setting, into the home setting, sometimes in community clinics and long-term care facilities. And so they're going to be in different states. So they will move from here to maybe there first, and then go to the long-term facility, maybe go to the hospital and bounce between the different care institutions. So what do you do with the data? And what do you do with integrating the data, make sure you can make sense of it, and then help the patient to improve on his or her health? Another thing is that usually in academic medical centers, we do a lot of treatment, surgeries, procedures, but really the entire full cycle of care starts from prevention, early diagnosis. And even after treatment, there's post-treatment and survival. If the patient survives, then you obviously want them to return to function. So if they go to school, you want them to go back to school. If they have a job, you want them to go back to work. And if they are not going to survive, you want to make sure they have a good palliation strategy so that they could figure out what's important to them and set goals. And so all of this requires sort of us thinking about the physical care environment and the virtual care environment. And that's really what we're talking about today. The use of Internet of Things is going to be Internet of Things everywhere. It's going to be data, and data is going to allow one to create algorithms, and sometimes using machine learning, it could even get automated. And so what's that going to look like? And so, a lot of I think Bill Gates was the first person to wire his home into everything connected. But this is not, you could just go buy a Nest or any sort of cameras in Costco, and you could hook it up. And basically, there's a lot of data that's going to be available. And so, however, there are some issues with integrating consumer technology into electronic health records and the typical records that doctors use, right? So one is, are the data clinically valid, right? And validity is extremely important. Why? Because we use the data to treat patients. So they say if somebody's glucose is really high, you need to adjust for insulin. If somebody's blood pressure is really high, you make them take blood pressure medications. So you have the story like Theranos, who basically was not ready. And people get really sort of endangered because they're not ready. And these information could be used to make medical decisions. So we need to make sure that the data is valid, right? So now you have Apple Watch, and that could detect arrhythmias, and a lot of things that people wear that will tell you if your rhythm strip is normal, if you're having arrhythmias, or some claim to measure blood pressures accurately, but a lot of this is subject to validation. So I just wanted to point out that anytime you create or invent a medical device, you need to validate it. The second thing is the data reliable? So if you take it multiple times, is that going to fall within a certain range and of reliability? And then there's just so much. You just got two hands, so I mean you could like wear a watch on each side, or like you could put stickers everywhere. I mean there's just so much real estate you have in your body. And as far as I know, wearables are for healthy people that wants to track how many steps, but sick people, they want to extubate themselves. I've never seen anybody who has a tube in them wanting to keep them in there. They don't want any stickers in their body either. Okay, so I mean, what in a state of confusion or in a state of illness, you become a very different person. And I think that's something that I think technologists need to recognize. When you approach a patient, and it could start with your family member that's aging, and so they are very different. They don't want to wear a lot of these things. A lot of elderly don't want to get tracked. They don't want to know they don't want you to know where they are. Okay? And then there's this issue of open versus closed systems. So if you have an open system, right, like used to be Windows and Intel, but now it's Android and everybody else, right? And Microsoft is coming back. But then that's an open system. But then if you have a closed system like Apple, then you need to, if you create something, where do you fit in? Like, do you fit into an open system, or do you fit into a closed system? And if you are starting a business, how will you compete? So that's and it's also it's very difficult to now create a new standard, right? You don't want to create a new Android or a new iOS system, or a new Microsoft system. So, and then the last issue is there's a lot of missing data. So a lot of these Fitbits apparently went into people's washing machines. When people are tracking the Fitbit data, and there's a lot of missing data. So these devices, you need to charge them. Sometimes you forget to take them out. And so if you are tracking people heart rate or respiration or anything meaningful, clinically meaningful, and you're missing like 12 hours of the 24 hours, how can you trust the data to make clinical decisions? And so that's another issue that I think hasn't been completely addressed, and I'm sure that in the future we'll get there, but it's just not there yet. So the other issue is the digital data, right? So you go from these individual devices and you're going to integrate into where? Where's the data go? And there are a lot of companies that want to be platform companies, but I haven't really seen one that's really viable, because that means everybody needs to give you their data, and that's been problematic. So you have these individual little cloud servers everywhere, created by different companies. They don't really talk to each other. And so where's the data aggregation going to take place? And also you have these large electronic health record systems that are sort of kind of outdated in their technology, but they have dominant market share. And so how do you work with them? And how do you deal with the non-captured data or the lost data? So this area is very exciting, but there's really a lot of work to make it happen. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen within, 10 years, because it's just moving very fast. The technology is, but the compliance issues, the regulatory issues are moving a lot slower, particularly in healthcare. So the data from electronic health records and the digital health space and sometimes even telehealth space if you talk to patients remotely via video conference, are going to be available for healthcare settings for home for individuals and are going to come from these places as well. The data will be used not only in healthcare but for research to track patients' outcomes, right? So let's say that I'm a geriatrician and I need to probably run on 3 nursing homes in a weekend. Each one has 100 beds. That's 300 patients. I will never get to go home. But most of the 300 patients are not sick. Maybe there are 20 that's sick that will really require my attention. So I should really spend my time taking care of these 20 patients and the other 280 patients. I have normal data to show that they're normal. And so how do we more appropriately use clinician time and save costs for the healthcare system? I think that's another challenge, right? And then pharmaceutical companies obviously also want to track some of these things. So they want to know if they give you a chemotherapeutic agent or a drug that you have side effects from it. They want to track how you're doing, particularly in clinical trials. They tend to be very, very expensive. And if there's a way to track patient status at home, or even, more conveniently, that would be an opportunity. So technology is a tool. Anytime you have a tool, you need to know when to use it, and that's the context. And so here at Stanford, in my lab, I have a lab called the HABIT Laboratory. It's a Health Analytics, Behavior Intervention, and Technology, HABIT. HABIT Laboratory in our center, where we train clinicians to work with designers and engineers, and that includes programmers and data analysts. So a lot of times clinicians only know about pathophysiology and how to treat the patient, but they have no idea how to design something. So when they design something, it doesn't look too good, and nobody wants to use it. And so the designers usually are not trained in data analysis. So they don't know where to put the data, like the interface and where the data go. And the data analyst, even though they could come up with really good algorithms and information for the clinicians, they need to work with the clinicians to figure out how to do that. So we basically integrate all these different knowledge together, and we train people together here at Stanford. So now I'm going to move to the opportunities that I saw in Taiwan several years ago. So just a little bit about Taiwan. Taiwan has a population of 23 million, so it's a little bit bigger than Florida in terms of the population. Florida has 21 million. It's a GDP of about $500 billion. And in the US, we have about 17 trillion population, over 300 million. So it's a very large difference in size and population. So why did I go to Taiwan? And I'll show you why. First of all, my family is originally from Taiwan, and that's probably the biggest reason. Get to visit family. Okay, and the food is pretty nice. All right, and metro is pretty nicely set up in Taipei, and it's very clean. So I like to visit. I like to visit family, and I like to enjoy the culture. But if you look at, and this is a slide from Michael Porter, so if you look at Taiwan's national cluster export portfolio, and this is the share of exports, so each one of these little bubbles, this size is about 6 billion. So you could see that Taiwan is growing in its shares of information technology. It's doing okay in medical device, but it's really growing in this area, and these areas are declining. But the idea is that there's a lot of industry aggregation. So when I do a startup in Taiwan, within a 1-hour drive, I could visit all the suppliers and vendors and basically build a prototype in 2 weeks. So if I have a clinical idea that I want to make it happen, 2 weeks. I just go around borrowing different gadgets, and I just say, hey, can I borrow that? Can I borrow that? And if it works, I'll buy it from you. And so people let us borrow all sorts of stuff. And we just put it together like a toy, like a piece of Lego. So really, it's the idea that matters, that you could, and the ability to put it together. Taiwan also makes about half of all the semiconductors in the world, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, and a large proportion of PCs and phones and notebooks all made by Taiwanese companies. The other thing is that if you look at the patents, and so each one of these bubbles is 3,000 patents. This is sort of growth of patents. So Taiwan is doing pretty well. South Korea is really doing very well in sort of growing. But the numbers in Taiwan, this is 1 million patents per 1 million population, is really high up here. And so there are a lot of things being created. But then you look at the wage, right? It's $9 an hour. So if I spend if I spend $1,500 a month, I could hire a really great engineer from National Taiwan University. $1,500 a month. And these are like top engineers. They score the top level on the national exam. And so, and they are used to sort of working with companies like TSMC, and the ones that work with TSMC, then they become more expensive. But we could get them at a relatively good sort of, in terms of salaries. I think there's a lot of talent that's over there. Now, even though there are strengths, so they have very strong clusters, availability of scientists and engineers. Math and science education is excellent. University research and collaboration is excellent. It become even better in the last few years. There's intense local competition, good, solid IP protection, and infrastructure is all very good. There's some weakness as well. So legal framework could be improved, and I think the government has been actively trying to improve it in the last few years for startups and for VCs. There's a large brain drain. I live over here, I don't live over there, but I mean, there's a lot of people coming over to the United States. And our model has been brain circulation, not brain drain. So we will send our engineers over there. We'll send the Taiwanese engineers over here to look at how we do things, and our engineers over there to look at the manufacturing process, because they need to know how things are made. The cost of doing business and the tax system, 3-4 years ago, there was a lot of bureaucracy, but I think the government realized that that's a major issue for businesses to locate in Taiwan, and so they've done a lot of tax reforms around that. Environmental regulations still need some work. Low prevalence of in-war foreign direct investment. And in terms of management, I think the management talent needs further development compared to the United States, compared to Silicon Valley. So one is that it's a gateway to China. It's strategically located in the Asia-Pacific region, and it's mostly small to medium-sized businesses. And so there's quite a bit of opportunities. It's got world-class technology and intellectual property protection. And logistics, I think, is the best part, which is you could pretty much source a lot of the equipments in a very short distance, and people do a good job reliably on them. And so if you are thinking about doing a startup, and you do design thinking here at Stanford, and you create your prototype, you might want to just visit some of those vendors, because it's going to save you a lot of time. Try to even put a prototype together and start a manufacturing process. And so I think there's quite a bit of advantage of doing that. And right now there are a lot of companies now that are just visiting Taiwan, and if you're interested in just visiting, you could contact these people, and they could set up like these visits for you, like a little tourism, except it's for like logistics for IT startups. And so they would just take you everywhere to source with the companies and to see if they're interested in making what you are making. Okay, so I'm gonna now give you an example of our own startup. It's called MedicusTek, and I have to confess, I'm a reluctant entrepreneur. I don't know if you heard of that. If not, I just made that up. So about 6 or 7 years ago, my friends from MIT came to me and said, hey, Jason, we've been at our jobs for a while, and we're all in like early 40s, and we kind of have a midlife crisis. And they say, let's start a company. And I said, well, I'm actually kind of busy because I have to see patients, I have to teach, and I have to do research, And so why don't I introduce people to you? So I happen to know some engineers in Taiwan that are excellent engineers. They also want to do startups. And so I kind of matched them together. I said, you go meet with this person at this time and see if you like each other. So then the next thing I know, they flew to my office here at Stanford and said, Jason, we want to start a company, but we don't know each other. You need to be in it. And I was like, well, I was the matchmaker, matchmakers are not supposed to be part of the marriage. But anyway, I to facilitate this, I have agreed to it. And so I was one of the 4 co-founders of the company. And even before we started, we have to think about sort of what problems we're solving, because the issue with engineers, and it's not a criticism of engineering students, but a lot of engineers want to create something and then try to sell it, try to you could use it for this too. But really, I think what really ought to happen, and this is being taught here at Stanford all the time, is you need to know what problem you're solving first. And how are you going to know that, right? And so, we have to take people through a design thinking process. But we started with which problems we're solving. And what's our competitive advantage if we were to do that compared to existing solutions or other solutions out there? And we have to prove that our solution works and that we have a good market strategy and people are willing to invest in us. And so the company was started in 2012 by a whole bunch of doctors and engineers, and with the vision of integrating technology for a safer care environment. Okay, so my sort of expertise, even though I do most work in children, is on quality of healthcare. Okay, and so I want to make sure the care environment is safe. And we want to develop effective products to provide useful information for healthcare settings. So, if you see like a problem that happens to one person, I don't think you want to jump on that. Okay, you want to see a problem that happens to a whole bunch of people. So it creates a theme like, oh wow, this happened again. Well, how do we solve that? And then from there, you get your opportunity, and you get some ideas that how you want to do that, and start to think about prototypes of how you might do that. So we came into this issue that we knew was happening, and this is, again, not my expertise. This is in the opposite spectrum of the elderly population. But we realized that the biggest opportunity right now is the baby boomers, right? Everybody's reaching 65. Everybody somehow wants to live at home, but really cannot afford it. Independent living is an issue, and if you go to nursing home, it's going to be $150,000 a year, or it's going to be very expensive. So how do you solve this problem? And when people get old, your muscles are not as sort of, your reflexes are not as good. The muscles are weaker, and they fall. And it just turns out there's 1 million people fall in the hospital every year. Do you know how many beds are in the United States for hospitals, acute care hospitals? About 1 million. That means every bed is going to have one fall every year. Okay? And 60 to 70% are bedside falls. We also noticed, so this is for the people who can move around, right? People who can move around, they could fall. People who cannot move around, they're going to develop pressure ulcers. Have you ever sat on an airplane for a long time, and 6 hours, and you realize your wallet is in your butt? And you're like, oh, this is very painful. And that's a pressure ulcer, okay? That's a pressure point. So unrelieved pressure point will lead to a pressure ulcer, which in the elderly, it could look like a big hole in your back, like erosion, like a little volcano, okay? And what happens is that infections start to brew, and then people go into sepsis, and they could die. So you don't want that. And so you want to relieve the pressure points before it becomes a pressure ulcer. So we recognize, too, that there are 2.5 million patients affected each year, and 60 to 7% are acquired in the hospital. So we began to think about a solution to address these two major issues. And also what we recognized was that these are considered preventable conditions by Center for Medicare and Medicaid. And what that means is that insurance companies will not pay for them anymore. So CMS will be like, oh, sorry, you should have prevented this fall. We're not paying for additional CT scans, hospitalizations, surgeries. It's all on you, the hospital. Okay, so that's pretty bad, right? If you have a patient fall, and they fall quite often, in a 200-bed hospital, every day there's one fall. 200-bed hospital, every day there's one fall. And if you have ever been in a hospital and you heard a fall, you'll never forget it. It's like skull on concrete, like nowadays we use more carpeting, but it's pretty scary. So basically, the hospitals are on the hook, because if a patient falls, it's a preventable condition, and if they fall too often, you know what happens? They shut down the hospital. JCO will shut down your hospital. So dangerous hospital, shut down. Okay? And same thing with pressure ulcers. Okay? And so this is about $34 billion direct cost to treat falls. Average cost of fall with injuries of $14,000, and I think this is now an underestimate because the data is almost it's at least 5 years old, so it's much more now. And same thing, you know, pressure ulcers, pressure injuries. They rename it to pressure injuries. That suggests that it's an injury that's caused by somebody. That's like a trigger for a lawsuit. You injured me. Okay, so it went from pressure ulcers to pressure injuries. Okay? So this is what a lot of hospitals have right now, a little strip, right? And if the patient gets off in it, basically this strip documents falls. Because you could never run like Superman unless you have a cape to actually save the patient at the bedside, right? I mean, so the New York Times says, is any hospital or nursing home so well staffed that someone can materialize within seconds for this? The answer is no. Okay. Now, for most hospitals, if you visited a nursing home recently or a hospital recently, there are bed rails, right? So the policy is to get the bed rails up so the patients won't just fall, right? It turns out the bed rails for sort of unconscious patients or people with confused patients, they could strangle under the bed rails. But you still have to get them up. I mean, it's policies and procedures, okay? So there's no time to react with the old system. And this is when we're trying to solve this problem. Okay, I just want to check on the time, so 5 o'clock. Are we okay? All right. So here's where Stanford's methodology and design thinking, ideal, is all around here. We started to train engineers to think this way, to empathize on the situation, that we ask them to observe, to listen to people, to see what they're doing, to ask them what they're thinking, basically use all your senses. Then to define a problem that you believe could help the patient. Okay, and then to ideate on some possible solutions, to create a prototype and to test it. Okay, so this is what we do with our engineers. Okay, so first we create a little prototype here, and we created a little human being on top of prototypes, and we go around nursing homes. We see how they take care of the patient, how they roll the patient for those that cannot move, how they help the patient up to go to the bathroom. When they get up, how do they get alerted when the patient needs to go to the bathroom? And we talk to a whole bunch of nurses, and basically we just kind of have fun. It's like your fourth grade crafts project, okay? Except everybody loves it. I mean, because you get to play with toys, right? Then we start to create like mock-ups. You know, what's it going to be like? Like if you're sleeping next to the patient, or you're in the room after, or if you're the nurse in the hospital, what do? Right? So we start to like film people, like we create like a little film, like how will you solve this problem? And then we start to actually do mock-ups in the hospital on where the equipment's going to be, because you know hospitals, they have a lot of different equipments, so they have real estate problem just like humans. Okay, they don't want you to unplug their thing and plug yours in. That's not good. Don't try to do that in the hospital. I know you need iPhone chargers and everything, but try not to kill a patient. So basically, we have our engineers. They get to work, and they started to create the prototypes. I tell you, this is 2 weeks. This is what I'm showing you here. This prototyping is 2 weeks. But the design thinking part took significantly longer, just to understand the problem. It took months just to understand how to solve this type of problem. Okay, but the actual prototyping, the sourcing of all the digital materials over there is 2 weeks. So we created the system with the control box next to the patient's bedside that could talk. And could say, please do not get off the bed. A nurse will be right with you, in different languages. So it could be in Spanish, Mandarin, Taiwanese, your mother's voice, your wife's voice. Actually, one of the engineers, his wife said, please do not get off the bed. That kind of worked. But then we have a sensor pad. The sensor pad has a matrix. Depends on where the pressure points are, it lights up. And then they sends the message to either a dashboard, the nursing station, or an Apple or Android device. Okay, so this is where it's placed in the hospital. So you got a nursing station. Some of the nursing stations are too crowded. We don't have the real estate to put the monitor, so we could directly send to the nurses mobile device. Control box is here. And in the area of pressure ulcers, we also give them a pad so they could see how they rotate the patient. So what happens is that do you know how people get repositioned in the hospital for people who cannot turn, like stroke patients with stroke? So they have this protocol. Every 2 hours or every hour, you turn the patient to the left. Then you turn the patient to the right. And then you turn the patient to the left. And then you need to go and document it, right? So somebody came in, turned the patient to the left. It's almost like people clean the bathroom. They write like when they come and clean the bathroom, but it's always dirty. Okay, same thing. Okay, you turn the patient to the left. Next time you come, the patient's already on the left. What do I do now? Should I follow the protocol? The patient's already on the left. Should I turn the patient to the right, then to the left? Right, this happens all the time, confusion. Confusion with the protocol, okay? Confusion with the protocol. So what we're able to do with an algorithm that we developed and tested, over 20,000 patients now, okay, is we actually know based on the way they move if they are sleeping or if they've woken up. We know that from the data. We also know if they've set up because the butt looks different on this sensor, right? We also know if it's a kid. We also know if they put their hands on it, okay? Now, we also know if they are now moving to the side of the bed. And we know if they got out of bed. Okay, we also know how long they got out of the bed. So let's suppose that my father, who's, miles from me, I put one of these, and he leaves for the bathroom, and he doesn't come back in 20 minutes, I will get alerted. Okay? But the idea of preventing fall is to understand when they get up, starting to set up intention to leave bed and capture them here before they leave the bed. And then for people who are doing remote monitoring, we also want to know if they left the bed, did they come back on time? Now this is the pressure ulcers slide. So if the patient, this patient is being monitored for pressure ulcer. These are the patient monitored for falls. Same system. We developed just two algorithms. One for the falls for people who could move. One for the pressure ulcer for people who could not move. Okay? These are pressure points that have been there for a while. So if unrelieved pressure point, what's going to happen? It's going to get darker and darker. And then we could look into a 24-hour record, continuous record, to know who repositioned the patient. Did they do it? We could also send an alert to the nurse every 2 hours. You need to reposition your patient. Or you didn't do it well. You know why? Because the pressure is still not relieved. I'm still seeing this little thing here. You need to relieve that pressure. So you know how the nurse turns? Sometimes they make a little towel roll, put it under, or they have a pillow. Okay? How do they know that? They have no data. How do they know that? They don't. So we're providing them with a tool to accurately reposition the patient so the patient does not have any pressure points. Okay? And the next generation, we could do it automatically. You don't need a person. Okay, we've already done that. So, so the idea now is to have cost savings for both the healthcare system, for the families, to decrease the sitter cost. So right now, if people have fall risk, so the nurses go every shift, and they have a survey. And if you score a certain point on a survey, you are at full risk. And so what they do is they put you under like an observation, like a sitter. So a sitter just kind of sits there, and a sitter falls asleep. Who could be a sitter? Who could be like continuously eye open during the night? I don't know anybody like that. Okay? So you don't need a sitter. You need a runner. You need somebody 18 years old just to run around the hospital saving patients from falling. You do not need a sitter. A sitter is very expensive. It's like at least $250 for a 12-hour shift. Okay? So basically, you're reducing the need for a sitter, reduce the need, it's more targeted notification, right? So now you know you're getting alerted, and we give people like alerts that you have 45 to 60 seconds to get there to save the patient. So that's right, you really need a runner, okay? And we help the hospital because every time they get one of these falls or pressure ulcers, they have to pay for all the costs and they get sued. And it's bad reputation for the hospital. It's terrible. You get audited like IRS audits your hospital because they want to know what happened to the patient. Why did the patient fall? So there's a total audit by the health department. Okay? And then most importantly, we're going to save lives. Why? Because after somebody falls, their life expectancy just shortened. 50% of people will die within a year because they're immobilized. So particularly the elderly. I'm talking about the elderly, right? So fall is really like the starting point for something really terrible to that person. So if you could prevent a fall, they could have good quality of life. So it's great. So we've not now done this, and when I say we, it's really my team because I'm here at Stanford. But the methodology is the same. You know, you just got to figure it out. This is the old slide, but now we have over 20,000 patient days of data. We have 0 falls during the U.S. hospital trial. Over 1 year period, nobody fell on our class. Zero. Okay. And we did have some falls early on when we were developing the system. And this is compared to the average of 3 to 12 falls per 1,000 patient days, okay? So again, if it's 5 falls per 1,000 patient days, a 200-bed hospital will have on average 1 fall a day. Okay. So we published the paper. This is based on a trial at Leahy Medical Center in Boston, and nobody fell. We also did a trial at Kaiser. So validation is important for clinical IoT, right? Because you need to show it works. And nobody fell at Kaiser either. And the way we told it's a kind of an investment, right? You invest $1 in the technology, you will save $4 to $5. Because they could calculate that. They know how much they pay for falls last year. Every hospital knows that. When you write that check, it's not subtle. Sometimes the whole quarter of profits gets wiped out by one check in a hospital. So they know. And we have the numbers too. So because of the effort in design thinking, in creating the right type of solutions, our team won the 2017 Innovation Prize. There's only one winner out of 2,000 vendors at that. It's a 20,000 people event. And so it was given for the most innovative new product service technology at the world's largest annual MedTech event. We also got the Innovation Prize from Taiwan. This is the former premier. So that's our story. It's ongoing. Now we got to figure out how to sell this thing, how to price it, how to scale. And I think that's a struggle for every startup. And we just recently hired a new CEO, 25-year veteran in the health IoT industry. And I think he's going to do the job. The way we think about it is, in the beginning, you have the engineers and maybe the doctors, and you do the clinical trials, and then you need to, it's like a relay. I mean, this thing takes so long, and people have different skill sets. So, we then did a national search for somebody who could do the job to take it to the next level, to scale it up. And that's been our strategy. I don't know if it works for everybody. Some founders, they are super talented and they learn along the way. And I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. I'm not good at, running around different hospitals and trying to sell this thing. Okay. So when we think about design thinking, we often forget about systems thinking. Okay. So systems, when you try to introduce a new product to a hospital, there are competing incentives. There are people making money out of this. Most hospitals, before the penalty came, they don't really care about falls, because the more the people fall, the more money they make, right? Because if it's fee-for-service, most hospital executives just see the numbers up and up because they're not doing their job, but they still get paid. There are regulatory frameworks that needs to happen. So before, there used to be IT system. Right? So just computers going through it. Now, and there used to be biomed, right? Let's say you have a blood pressure cuff, and you go to biomed, make sure no radiation, make sure it doesn't interfere with your cell phone, all that, right? But now you hook the equipment into the IT system. It could get hacked. Can you imagine if all the equipments in the hospital are now in the IT system? Who's keeping track of them? Are there patches for attacks, for different viruses? I mean, this is like an issue. So every IT system in every hospital is trying to figure this out. And I don't think anybody has a good solution yet, but people are super conservative because, if it's under my clock that I let this innovation come in and something bad happens, man, I'm going to get fired, right? So that's a different issue. And I believe this is totally a solvable problem. It's the same way that we need to solve for all the computer viruses that have ever come along. It's the same way that we solve all the human viruses that ever come along, right? Every time there's a new virus, HIV, or figure out a combination therapy, things get figured out. New type of cancer, new type of infection. You just need to figure it out. And I have trust in our engineering friends to do that. Procurement, big issue. Is that under CapEx or is that under disposables and things like that? Market readiness, are they ready? Is bigger hospitals, more mature hospitals ready, or are the smaller hospitals ready? I don't know. Media backlash, right? There's always all these attacks that's happening. Cultural norms. Hospitals, entire different culture. Because somebody died there. Dies every day, people die there. So it's a different culture. People are intrinsically more conservative. So as one deploys this kind of innovative framework, you need to think about design and prototyping, as I mentioned, user experience. You need to protect your patents. You need to think about your supply chain, how to source your materials if you want to make a lot of them. You need to do clinical trials. You need to understand the regulatory, all the systems you need to integrate. You need to be supported by policy. So if I didn't have that preventable condition thing, that hospitals ended up eating the cost, I don't think it's going to drive it. Because why would people care? Well, people fall. That's what most executives will say, oh, yeah, if you're not careful, you're going to fall. But, right? So if you don't have that policy, you say, no, if a patient falls, you pay for it. And then hospitals start to say, really? Let's think about how to solve that problem, right? Deployment, sales force, marketing, customer service. I mean, if you're a startup, the United States is very large. And you need to provide technical support. So I keep on going back to the supply chain, and I said, look, it's not enough to be 90% reliable. It needs to be like 99.999% reliable, because I can't send a person out there when it breaks. I could just replace it, right? And it's very different in Taiwan, because everything's so close. Oh, things break, they just send like a tech over. And just take the metro, send the tech over. And salary is relatively inexpensive. So it's like a totally different model that we're operating here between the two systems. And then when you start selling the stuff, that's when the liability comes. That's when you're in trouble. That's when people start to want to sue you, particularly if you're doing well. So really, like you really need to have a team that really understand the complexity of selling in the healthcare space. And also, there are different considerations for international markets, either in the UK, in the United States, in Japan. We're trying to get into Japan, but they're so different. And so we need the development, slow development, make sure we understand the right players before we could do anything. Now, fundraising is a challenge for any startup, right? Particularly healthcare. If you think about you're going to develop like a software and it's going to like work in 6 months, and then you're going to start scaling it, and you just might buy more servers and whatever. Healthcare, the moment you finish completely develop your product, even the clinical trials you need to do, right? The moment you start selling, it takes 18 months to qualify through hospitals and their system. So most startups would just die. They just die. They can't wait. They'll just die. Okay. So the valley of death is particularly deep. Like, in my view, working with Taiwan, this part was actually very tolerable. Like, working prototype was very fast. Engineering prototype, very fast. Even production was very fast, right? But then once you're trying to have distribution contract, that's when it becomes kind of hard, because then all these contracts you actually need to deliver and provide technical support. So then you need more money. And then we look at the money, I mean, you need like over 20, 30 million to start with, and probably a lot more if you want to do this. So our estimate is you need at least 50 to 100 million to scale. But this is a big market. I mean, like I said, 200-bed hospital every day there's going to be one person falling, and people can't afford that kind of fall rates. And so it's a big enough market that so far we've been supported. And so when we look at this, and so you have this lean startup idea, and everybody probably read the book, but I'm going to tell you, for healthcare, it doesn't really work. It's too slow. So you need almost, you need a different way of supporting your team. And you know, I don't know which smart people is going to figure this out, and we've been sort of figuring it out along the way and getting extremely lucky, but it is not that fast. And you know, you need to assess the impact and use in clinical trials. But this is probably easier than pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals is crazy. Like you take the drug, one person dies, and then you're like off the market. 10 people die off the market. And so this is not as bad as pharmaceutical, but somewhere in between. And then you could always fail at the spread and the scale up if you're not careful about that barrier, that wall that people put up in the systems level. So even before you think about how you're going to develop the product, how you're going to sell it, you have to already think about systems issues and integrate that with design thinking. And so, so I encourage people here, particularly our students, to work with each other, engineering students, healthcare students, even business students. You have to have a business model right up in the front. How are you going to price this? How are you going to sell this? Before you develop anything. Like if you develop an equipment that leads to nowhere and doesn't connect to anybody, and the data is not useful, and it has nowhere to go, it's not going to be successful. So you have to think this through before you spend a lot of effort trying to do that. But in the future, there's no doubt that what we call IoT is going to get integrated into the care environment. It's going to allow sort of consumer relations management. Patients are now all have mobile apps. They're going to become citizen scientists, particularly with their own data. You're going to have patient-generated data, and you have to integrate it and make sense out of it. And so that this could be a tool for patient engagement. So the traditional walls of hospitals and clinics are going to be broken. And when machine learning and AI are mature enough, we're going to back to where we started. All the data hopefully will be passively collected to us in a secure way, analyzed, and just like a whisper into our ears, and you could go talk to your patient. And then the doctor will be back to holding the hands of the patient, spending the time nursing the patient, not the computer. Most of my residents now spend most of the time nursing the computer, probably eyeball the patient and nurse the computer. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to use the tool in a smart way and understand the limitations of the tool. Now, there's one bit of warning that I want to say. There's a hype about AI. And I think it depends on the quality of the data. If the data is crap, you're training on crap, so your algorithm is going to be crappy. Okay. If your data is biased, and it only collects from people of a certain social demographic group, and you think that's the right algorithm, and you apply it to another group, it's not going to be accurate. So I just wanted to warn that there's really a need for cross-disciplinary work here. That the doctors, the clinicians, the nurses, people who understand the care flow needs to be in the design with the engineers, the designers, the data scientists, like that graph. So that we at Stanford, we're a great training institution, particularly for this type of thing in Silicon Valley, we'll be able to create something that's actually useful and not another piece of junk. Okay, try not to create another piece of junk out there. And so with that, I will take any question. Thank you.
Thank you.